You're listening to the Femcast podcast, the podcast for women who are truly ready to drop the paralyzing perfectionism and self-doubt and just live their best hot mess life. Let's do this. This podcast is listener discretion advised for mature content and coarse language. Whatever. Hey you guys, what is up? And welcome back to the show. I'm so excited and grateful to have you here. Today I wanted to talk to you about perfectionism again, but we're going to take a bit of a different tone today. I wanted to really get to the core of why so many of us struggle with perfectionism, because I was really shocked to surprise that it does not happen to everyone. Or at least maybe some people I think maybe aren't aware of it, but they actually are. But that's a whole other conversation for another day. So my question to you today is, have you ever, so I'm assuming if you're listening to this, you're a perfectionist, because obviously the title caught your eye. So, having cleared that up and knowing the answer to that question, my question for you then is, have you ever wondered why you always struggle with being a perfectionist? Are you ever curious about why you're always being so hard on yourself? And if so, I totally get it and I hear you, and I just want you to know that you're not alone and you're not crazy and you're not all the things that people will make you out to be for being a people pleaser and a perfectionist. For years, I wondered why I struggled so much with perfectionism and why I was always so hard on myself for the littlest thing. And I was even hard on myself for being hard on myself, if you can imagine. And I was always so preoccupied with how everyone else was perceiving me. It took up so much space in my mind at all times. Until I really started to understand more about my perfectionism and why it was something that I struggled with for so long. And this only happened within the last few years that I really started to understand it. And I think once I started to really understand where my perfectionism and people-pleasing came from, then I was able to come at it from a different perspective, and I was able to work through it much quicker. To be honest, I didn't even realize it was an issue until not too long ago. It was, to me, I don't even think the term people-pleasing existed in my vocabulary for the longest time. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, that's me. Wow. Because I didn't think so. I thought everyone was disappointed with me, right? But that's kind of like the plight of the people pleaser. So that's why in this episode of the Femcast, I really want to talk about the real reason why you might be struggling with, perfectionist tendencies and what you can do today to kind of help yourself break free from that pattern once and for all while mastering the art of radical self-love and acceptance, because that's what we're all about here at the Femcast, so that you can start living your best hot mess life. So let's do this. So, I want to preface this conversation with a bit of a story. So recently I, was at an event and I was talking with a whole bunch of other women, and, I was, started chatting with this other woman who I was networking with, and, we were really vibing and having a conversation, and, we seemed to share a lot of things in common. And then, when she asked me what I did, I explained to her where I was at in my career. And then I said, oh, and I also, I'm the host and creator of the Femcast podcast. And she's like, oh, wow, that's great. Right. And she's like, what's that all about? And so I told her, I really, the focus of the podcast and my message is that I really help women who struggle with paralyzing perfectionism and self-doubt, just, really just let go of that and go on to live their best hot mess life. Right. And she's kind of like, huh. Yeah. It was like a dry kind of, huh. And I'm like, oh, okay. Cause usually people are, they'll follow up with a question. She's like, and somewhere from there, we moved on to the conversation of people pleasing and how that led me to that path. And she's like, oh, really? Like you think of yourself as a people pleaser? I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, that's something that I've totally struggled with my whole life. And it's something that, I've really had to work at letting go of. Right. And that's kind of what inspired the podcast. And she's like, oh, that's weird. I never would have, to me, I never really care what anybody else thinks. I kind of think I can't remember what the word that she use. I think she might have called it egocentric, that you need everyone to like you. And it's like, wow, you really have no idea what being a people pleaser is all about. Like, there was all this judgment that I kind of felt coming from her in that moment. And I was kind of like, no, it's a little different than that. It's not this need to win a popularity contest. Although sometimes, you know what, even that, can be the validation that we are seeking. And, like, if that's something that you've struggled with, you've needed to be the most popular, most liked, most loved person in the room, again, it may sound vain to someone who doesn't struggle with it, but for someone who does struggle with people pleasing, we know it goes a lot deeper than that. Okay. So I was kind of trying to like educate her on where it was coming from. I don't know that she got it, but whatever, it is what it is, like, to each his own. But I mean, and that's kind of a conversation that I've had from time to time when I do tell people what I do, with the podcast. Usually, like 9 out of 10 times, people are all over it and asking me questions and like, oh, do you talk about this? And have you ever experienced this? Oh, and I think I'm a people pleaser. And how do I, like, usually it boils over to this whole other like dynamic and conversation. But every so often I get that one or two people who are just so resistant to the idea of being a people pleaser and how vain they think it is and how selfish they think it is and how it's this insecure need that you have to make sure that everyone likes you and that you're palatable to everyone, which is in simple terms, yeah, but what people fail to understand, whether or not they've not experienced it so they can't understand, which oftentimes is the case, yes. But also, I think sometimes people are people pleasers, but they don't realize it and they don't realize where it's coming from. And those are the people that I really feel for, because it is a struggle. And I don't think you realize it until like you've sabotaged a few things in your life, right? Before you've actually realized it. And I can tell you right now, I can pick out the people pleasers in the room, like, right away. I know how to pick them. Like, I can see them. And if I had to separate them from one side of the room to the other, I would know exactly who the people pleaser is at all times. And I can tell you, I am 110% positive that woman struggles with some people pleasing tendencies, but doesn't realize it. So hopefully one day she comes to the realization. But here's the thing. And here's why I would never hold judgment on someone who was struggling with people pleasing. We need to learn and understand where people pleasing actually comes from. It doesn't come from the external need for a vanity validation, and it doesn't come from this need to be the most liked and most adored person in the room at all times. Perfectionism is not about the impression that you're trying to make. Perfectionism is about the pain that you're trying to avoid. And the pain that you're trying to avoid is usually tied to your worst fear, which in my experience was always abandonment, rejection, failure, and judgment. People-pleasing and perfectionism for me was the only way that I knew how to avoid those fears and therefore avoid the pain that experiencing those fears happening felt like. And so this especially showed up anytime I thought someone was upset with me, right? If I thought someone was upset with me or I had done something wrong in some way, that fear and that anxiety that I had let someone down would be so intense for me. And I would literally do everything in my power to avoid that. And how I avoided that was through the mechanism of, being a people pleaser and a perfectionist. And that's how I avoided that pain. So it's really important to understand that. And oftentimes where that pain comes from is really rooted in early childhood, right? So, if you grow up, and this could be anybody, like, listen, I'm never about blaming the parents for everything that we go through. I think, when it comes to, being a human and having a human experience in this world, I think people bring us into this world. Yes. Are they always the most equipped? No, right? Do they have their own wounds and patterns that they're also trying to work through? Hell yeah, right? And so I think even, I mean, if you've had an abusive relationship with your parents and with your family, obviously this is all going to probably be very real for you. But for those of us who don't kind of fall into that category, we were just, raised by a lot of people who had their own emotional wounding and their own experiences and projections that they were bringing into their parenting, then some of these things do take place, right? And so it's things like, when we're young, when we're constantly met with or burdened with, high expectations, a lot of times, whether it's parents, siblings, caregivers, teachers, sometimes we're just burdened with such high expectations, and we can really feel the pressure to really excel and do well. And we can also feel the fear of letting people down who have those high expectations of us, right? Because we see and react to the emotional joy that it brings people when we do well, right? Like I think of my friend when we were growing up, she used to dance and she used to compete, and her mom would just, she would light up every time she won a competition. And every time she lost or she didn't do that well, you could tell like her mom just looked so sad and so defeated for her daughter, like not for herself, right? Well, maybe there was a little bit of herself in there, but mostly for her daughter. And, whether or not that was healthy or not, I mean, that's how she was, coping with what she was experiencing in that moment. But how it was perceived, by my friend who was a dancer was, oh my God, I have to win. Like I have to do well. I have to do good in this competition. Otherwise, it's going to cause emotional pain for my mom. And it would make her so happy if I did really well, right? And so we put these high expectations of ourselves. And I mean, in some families, the high expectations is clearly communicated. Like you have to get straight A's. Otherwise, you're going to summer school. Or if you don't graduate at the top of your class, then, we're sending you off to military school or whatever. Like, I mean, sometimes it's communicated. Sometimes it's directly communicated through communication with family and through caregivers and authority figures. Sometimes it's implied by our emotional responses to things, right? So if the adults in the room, whoever they were telling us and putting a lot of pressure on us to perform and to perform really well, or if they were indirectly telling us that we needed to perform really, really, really well based on how they would respond to our performance emotionally, that would instill in us this need to constantly show up and be perfect. Because if we're not perfect, we're not at the top of our game, people are going to be disappointed. We're going to let people down. There's going to be consequences, right? And as a child, I mean, I know as adults, we don't see things that way, but as a child, that's how we process that. And I'm telling you, I would love to get a therapist on this show to talk about this and this journey and even like share some more of my experiences with you guys on this. Cause honestly, I just think it's so powerful, when we can look at it from this perspective, because when we can see it this way, then we can start to shift it. Another way that, this can really show up is if you're around a lot of critical, judgmental, or emotionally abusive relationships. For me, like through most of my childhood and, adolescence and even adulthood, really, a lot of the relationships that I was surrounding with me were highly toxic and abusive, really critical and judgmental of me, of others. My romantic relationships were loaded with toxicity, with emotionally unavailable partners who were really critical of me, partners who would gaslight me, partners who would, withdraw and ghost me or come back in and out, and basically kind of leave me in this pattern of trying to figure out, what did I do wrong and how can I do it better and how can I show up differently to avoid this person leaving me all the time and abandoning me all the time, right? Really scratching at that abandonment and rejection wound. And so for me, the fear of judgment and people being critical of me or emotionally abusive of me was very, very, very real. I can even remember one of my teachers in school being horribly emotionally abusive to all her students. How she got a teaching license, I will never understand. But we did, and we all experienced it. And it's fun. It's so funny. Like, I sometimes, we were sitting around, I think it was like Thanksgiving. We were telling stories from like childhood school and things and situations. And I was telling the story about, we used to call her Miss Poison. I won't say her name. We used to call her Miss Poison. And so I told a Miss Poison story. And then my sister was like, no, she did that to me. And I'm like, no, she did that to me. So apparently she did that to all her students. And me and my sister are like 9 years apart. We went to the same elementary school. So it just goes to show you, like, if you have somebody in your past who's treated you badly, number one, it's okay for you to be responding in this way and to maybe struggle with the fear of judgment and emotional abuse and people being hard on and critical of you. But it also goes to show you that her response probably had nothing to do with me, because she seemed to do it to all her classes every year, right? She would basically put you in front of the classroom. Whoever didn't do their homework, she would put you in front of the classroom, make you stand up in front of everyone. And I think, I don't know how many people there were there that day it was me. I think maybe there was like 5 or 6 of us who hadn't gotten our homework done. She made us all stand in front of the class, and she's like, now look, children, these are the children that in 20 years from now, 30 years from now won't amount to anything. And I just remember like this horrible pit in my stomach, like, oh my God, I'm such a loser right now. And everyone in the class was looking at me like, oh my God, how could you be such a loser? At least that's what it felt like to me, right? And sure enough, she had done the same thing to my sister, right, when she was in her class, right? And probably did the same thing every year to every class, because that was how probably she felt about herself. And she was just projecting that onto these poor children that she was left to be responsible for, right? But when we think of, and even just being in an environment where your friends are being judgmental, oh my God, the things me and my friends used to say about other people. And in your head, you're like, well, is that what people are saying behind my back? Right? Because people say, oh, people don't talk about you. They're too busy living their own lives. Bullshit. We used to talk shit about everybody. I don't know what they're talking about. We used to talk crap about everyone. We would even talk crap about our friends when they weren't around. Like, as soon as they weren't in the room, it's like, oh, did you see what she did? Oh my God, it was so bad. But anyway, hopefully we've all grown out of that. But the point that I'm trying to make is, if you are surrounded by very critical, judgmental, emotionally abusive people, there's a high probability that you've learned to be a people pleaser and a perfectionist just to avoid that pain of being criticized and judged and emotionally abused. Because that's how we avoid the criticism. That's how we avoid the judgment. By making sure, as a people pleaser, for me, it was making sure that I did everything the way, how's the best way to put this? Not that would be pleasing, but people would be most impressed with. So that people wouldn't find shit to talk about or pick apart or judge me for or shame me for or go talking with other people behind my back about. Right? That was literally like my life GPS. What can I do here to avoid people talking shit about me and judging me behind my back and saying, oh my God, did you hear? Did you see what she did? Did you find out? And it just it literally became my compass. And it started with the little things, but my God, did it get did it boil out of control, And it literally became like a fucking way of life for me. And I didn't even realize it until a few years ago that I was actually doing it. And when I did, I was just floored. Like, holy crap. My whole life, my compass has been, what is everyone else saying or thinking about what it is that I'm doing? And what can I do to avoid people saying or thinking badly of me? And that was literally my compass. I'm like, wow, that is so distorted. And it's taken years. it has taken years to really, number one, reprogram my mind to think, okay, what do I want? What would bring me joy? What would make me happy? And, to fuck with everyone else, right? Especially if they're people that don't matter to me. But also, not just to reprogram my brain, but to actually be aware. I think the awareness is the hardest part because you're so used, like you're doing it on default, that you don't even realize that you're doing it because you've been doing it for so long. And it's literally been a whole exercise in learning who I am again. Like, who am I if I'm not doing what everybody else wants me to do? What do I want? Because I don't think I've ever actually fucking asked myself. So yeah. So, I mean, that's been a big learning curve for me. And I think that was probably the category that I fall into the most. Another reason that you could struggle with perfectionism is that a lot of your self-worth has been tied to accomplishment. So maybe, similar to the first one, where you're constantly being met with and burdened with high expectations, if your self-worth is tied to you being successful at things and otherwise you're basically like a nothing, which I know of a lot of families that I saw growing up that their children felt like this. Like, if you didn't get straight A's, like, not that you're not my child, but, it was a problem, right? You were like a massive disappointment. There's so much I see of that in relationships, right? And even in other women that I've talked to, right? There was so much pressure on them. So much pressure. And, if they didn't succeed, and if they didn't do well in school, if they didn't get that job as a doctor, or as a lawyer, or as a pharmacist, or whatever they were working towards, that, their families had basically, had hoped for them since the day they were born. Suddenly they were like this huge disappointment, and all their self-worth then is tied to meeting these accomplishments and expectations. And, when you're in that situation, you're kind of, especially when you're brought up in it like that, you don't even realize, like, you've never been taught to ask yourself, what do you want? You've always been taught, this is what you're going to do. This is who you're going to be. This is what we expect of you. And all of your self-worth becomes tied to that. And I know so many people, I know one who, literally spent her entire life basically living the life that was planned out for her until one day, like me, she blew up her fucking life. And was like, fuck this. This is not my life. This is not the life I wanted. This is not the life I would have chosen. Now, she had a really hard time in the transition, and so did I at some points, because it's not an easy thing to do when you suddenly like blow everything up and just decide to start from scratch. But fuck, is she better off for it now? Now, there's ways to blow up your life and there's ways to not blow up your life. And I talked about that in another episode of the Femcast previously, like it was months ago. So if you're on the verge of blowing up your life, please go listen to that episode first, because there's some really wise words there that you might want to pay attention to before you go ahead and do that, because it's not easy. But that's often why we do blow up our lives if we struggle with being a people pleaser and a perfectionist. It's because we've been going through the motions of living someone else's dream and living someone else's life and living up to someone else's expectations for so long, or to avoid the pain of judgment, of abuse, of criticism, right? And rejection and abandonment. We've been trying to avoid all these pains and moving into the direction of what we thought was going to bring us the most love and acceptance. And that external love and acceptance became our North Star and our compass. And somewhere in all that, we get lost. We get lost in the shuffle. And what happens is we wake up one day and we realize, this is not my life. This is not my partner. These are not my friends. This is not my fucking job. These are not my fucking clothes. Who am I? Hey, gorgeous. I hope you are loving this episode so far. We are going to get right back into it. But before we do, let me ask you, are you through with entertaining toxic, emotionally unavailable relationships and situationships that will never see you as anything more than just an option? Are you ready to up-level your standards and bid farewell to the era of it's complicated relationships once and for all? Can you imagine what it would be like to walk around confident as fuck, knowing that you're surrounded by more loving and fulfilling relationships that always treat you like you're the only woman in the room? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then you're exactly who I created my Up Level and Flow private mentorship program for. The online one-on-one coaching program that has been specifically designed to help you up-level all your relationships and your life. Whether you're looking to attract more loving and fulfilling relationships or up-level existing ones, this program is for you. My Up Level and Flow mentorship program will take you from the woman who is constantly settling for less than she wants and deserves in her relationships and in her life, who has pretended to be content with the it's complicated relationship status for far too long, to the woman who dares to raise her standards and expect more out of her life and her relationships and actually get it. Never ever chase anyone again. Be the one and the one will chase you. Send me a DM at the Femcast on Instagram or email me at maria@thefemcoach.com for more details. Let's get back to today's episode. Kaboom! Right? We just blow it all up. We light it up. It's gone. It's done. It's over. We start from scratch. Fuck, that's hard. Please don't do that. I'm begging you. Don't do that. Please go listen to that Flow Up My Life episode. Because I have some tips to do that the easy way, and not make it be so hard. So, fuck. Like, what are the takeaways from all this? Learn to recognize your worth outside of your accomplishments. There's so many other things to recognize yourself for. The human that you are, the emotions that you feel and that you express, the way you make others around you feel, the shit that you've moved through and you have survived. You are like a beast. You've probably accomplished so much shit in your life that you don't give yourself any credit for. Right? Learn to recognize yourself for that instead of all the other external accomplishments and crap that, you might have learned to recognize yourself for. Another thing you want to take away from this is learning that you're not responsible for other people's reactions, moods, emotions, judgments, or behaviors. None of that shit has anything to do with you. None of it. That teacher who put me in front of the classroom and basically shamed me and 5 of the other students and my sister and her fellow students, she was a toxic person who was dealing with her own shit and her own wounding, and she was projecting her crap onto a bunch of helpless children who then took that information, internalized it, and made it mean something about who they are. That fucking stops right now. If people behave badly, if they behave in hurtful ways, if they say hurtful things, if they're sad, if they're upset, if they're moody, if they're judgmental, if they're hurtful, that is not on you. That is on them. So stop taking responsibility for how other people are feeling, and stop choosing your actions and your words according to how you think they're going to make other people feel. Let how you feel be your compass and your North Star and what you desire your life to look like. Let that be your guide. Go inward to your internal compass and let that guide the direction of your life, and watch the magic unfold in your world, I promise you. And the third thing to take away from all of this is that, it's okay if someone is upset with you, especially if it's due to, maybe you standing up for yourself or setting a boundary or respectfully speaking your truth. Yeah, a lot of times people will be upset with you for that. People will get hurt. It'll be uncomfortable. Maybe they won't like it. Maybe it means they've got to look at things differently or change things about themselves, or maybe it's somehow taking away something that was comfortable for them. And so they're fighting back and they're resisting. That's okay. That is fine. And I'm sorry, there's like engines roaring past me right now, so you're probably hearing them, but whatever. I live on a main road, so that is all fine. It is fine for people to be upset with you. Someone being upset with you does not mean that they're going to abandon you, does not mean that they're going to judge you, does not mean that they're going to criticize you, does not mean that they're going to reject you, does not mean they're going to go behind your back and talk about you with all your friends and loved ones. If they are, they're toxic, they can go fuck themselves. You can let them go and be like, thank you so much. Thank you and goodbye. Peace out. It's been a slice. Maybe in the next life or not, whatever. But if it's a healthy relationship and a person you want to keep around, yeah, they may get upset for a minute. They may get their feelings hurt. They may get their feathers in a twist, but they'll come around. And if they respect you, they'll respect they'll respect your boundaries, or maybe they'll try and respect your boundaries and they'll fuck it up. And, that'll be something that, that'll be yours to kind of manage whether or not, you want to keep upholding. I mean, I always say keep upholding your boundaries. And if people aren't respecting your boundaries verbally, then you can put the boundaries in energetically. You can put the boundaries in with time, with space, with distance, with connection, with conversation. There's so many ways to put boundaries in a relationship. And really, honor your own truth and where you're at and what you need to be your best self, while also at the same time, respecting and being reciprocal in a relationship, right? Like, it's a balance, right? And you learn the balance. There's no set. And I'm so tired of people acting like it's this, like, we compartmentalize our emotions way too much, I think, sometimes, especially in the personal development community. I just put a boundary up, and if they don't respect your boundaries, bye, they're gone. Okay, yeah, it doesn't work that way. Like, there's so many people in my life that I have a struggle getting them to respect a boundary, but that doesn't mean I don't stop upholding them. It just means that I get to be in this conversation and this experience with them of trying to express and show my boundaries again and again, being consistent, while at the same time being respectful of their needs in a relationship and recognizing, where the give and take, where that beautiful balance and magic of give and take actually exists, right? Because it's never clear cut. It's never black and white. It's always moving. It's so ambiguous. It'll drive you crazy. But it's a constant evolution. And I think that's the important thing, right? And I think that when you get into this experience of trying to set clear boundaries with people, and being in these conversations where sometimes, things can get uncomfortable and people might get upset. And this has been a huge lesson that I've been learning lately, is that it is okay if people are upset with me. I used to take people being upset with me as, oh my God, I am the world's biggest failure right now. They hate me. The relationship is over. The friendship is over. The partner's going to leave me. The family member will never speak to me again. We are going to not speak until our deathbed. Right? All because we had a fight. And the love will never be the same again. It's all a lie. It is all a lie. They'll come back. Everything will be fine. Okay? And you'll both set your boundaries. You'll both find ways to express yourself. And you'll both find ways to reciprocate the energy in the relationship. If the relationship is worth it. If it's not, bye-bye. It's been a slice. Maybe in the next life is what I always say. It's been a slice. Maybe in the next life. Not now. Not available. Just not. And it's okay. It's okay to actually make that decision to say this relationship is not for me right now. That's fine. It's totally okay. We'll talk more about that in another episode. But hopefully this gives you some good little nuggets to kind of take away, understand the root cause of your perfectionism, understand where it's coming from, and, really be aware when you're in the pattern and what it's trying to, where it's coming from, what it's trying to remind you of, and where it began. And then depending on, what you're seeing, what patterns you're seeing play out in your life, figuring out which one of the takeaways or the solutions is really going to work for you. Let me know in the comments wherever you're seeing this, what your biggest takeaway was. And again, I am so going to try and get a therapist. These are the tools that worked for me. But I'm going to try and get a therapist on this show so that they can really break it down for us, help us get a deeper understanding of where it's coming from and how we can start to move through the process. If you're somebody who's really struggling with a history of being in emotionally abusive relationships, I'm a big believer in getting, some some really good sessions with a registered therapist or a psychiatrist to support you in that journey. I regularly see my therapist, and I have for years, and it has been so helpful for me in my healing journey to have that perspective and that sounding board and that neutral person there in my life to really see my blind spots and to really change the perspective on some of the stories that I was spinning in my mind about what all this stuff meant about me, right? And so that's where I think therapy is really, really a really, really, really powerful tool to have in your back pocket. So I encourage everyone. I think everyone should go to a therapist. That is my philosophy in life. I don't care. Okay, that is all for now. If you've got a question that you want me to answer on the show, if there's something that you're struggling with, curious about, or dying to know, email me at marie@thefemcoach.com. Who knows, you just might inspire the next episode of the Femcast. And if you love, love, love this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're seeing this episode, because that would mean the absolute world to me. So that is all for now. Until next time, massive love.